Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We're here this evening to debate C-69, which is the Budget Implementation Act, and we're again debating the out-of-control inflationary spending by these Liberals that is driving up the cost of literally everything for Canadians. And in the budget, for which this is the Implementation Act, we saw another $61 billion in inflationary spending piled onto the backs of Canadians, on top of the billions and billions we've seen over the last 9 years. And it must be noted that the result of this is Canadian taxpayers are on the hook for $58 billion in interest on that debt, which is more than the federal government sends to the provinces for health transfers. And we know this point has been made, but it's worth restating because it's just such an astronomical number. But all of this debt and interest equals more taxes on the backs of Canadians, which is why we saw on April 1st, the Liberals increase the carbon tax by 23%, notwithstanding the outcry from premiers and Canadians. And we know it's on the way to quadrupling, which we know now will be a $30 billion per year hole in the economy. That report has now become public. And of course, there's the recent job-killing tax hike as well. So, Mr. Speaker, the problem with all this spending, taxes, and red tape is that it's killing our economy. Canada is now the worst performing economy in the G7 and the worst performing economy in the OECD. Since 2019, the last year before COVID, Canada's GDP per capita is down 2%, while GDP per capita in the US has increased by 8%. So we're really having a huge gap here between our two countries. And we're the very bottom of the G7, the US is the top of the G7 after 9 years of this Prime Minister. And the OECD calculated that Canada's economic growth will be the worst of the nearly 40 advanced economies that are in the OECD this decade, again the very basement, below Greece and Italy, which are often the historical underperformers. And if this trajectory continues and is not reversed, the OECD projects that Canada will have the worst economic growth for the next 3 decades. And so as we debate this budget, all of this means that we are on track for the worst decline in Canada's standard of living in 40 years, according to a Fraser Institute report last month. In fact, we are seeing the widest gap in GDP per capita, which is a measure of standard of living, between Canada and the US since 1965. That's according to RBC. So, Mr. Speaker, this is alarming to me, and this should be alarming to all Canadians. This should be setting off alarm bells on the government benches about how did we get there? Clearly, all the inflationary spending, debt, taxes, and red tape have compounded. And really, it's what we've been calling economic vandalism. Mr. Speaker, I was talking to a constituent over the weekend who has a trucking firm, and he told me how his orders are down and how people are shipping less. And this is in the midst of the Greater Golden Horseshoe in Southern Ontario. And he's seeing that decline in business in the daily orders that they're getting. And he told me that often trucking is a harbinger of a decline in economic activity. And so we know this is true. So, Mr. Speaker, it confounds me that this is the case. How did we get this way in Canada? We have so many advantages in Canada that have been squandered by this Liberal-NDP government. And their fiscal and economic policies in this budget and the taxes that exacerbate it even further. Because in Canada, we have everything the world wants. We have 18 LNG projects on the desk of the Prime Minister awaiting approval. The Germans, the Japanese, the Poles, the Greeks have all come to Canada looking for our LNG. And we can help get the world off of coal and replace Europe's dependence upon Russian natural gas. Yet, this Prime Minister told the German Chancellor, there's no business case. And so Germany went to Qatar, and they helped build them the facility in 7 months. So this was a lost opportunity for Canada and for Canadian jobs. Mr. Speaker, Canada has all the critical minerals and many rare earth minerals as well. The world needs them. The world wants them. And we need them for our own economy. And so while we have 6% of the world's lithium, we don't extract it because this government's bad policies and ideological aversion to natural resource extraction industries. So, Mr. Speaker, we also have nuclear expertise, not far from my home in southern Ontario. We've got the second largest nuclear plant in the world, and there's a whole supply chain of companies that help feed that throughout southwestern Ontario. Some are located in my constituency. So yet another advantage that Canada has, and yet our economy and standard of living are in decline, in the worst decline in 40 years. So how can this be? Despite all these obvious advantages, smart people, good people, Canada's lacking in private sector investment in our economy. And we're seeing that in the recent report with the lack of entrepreneurs that will take risks and seed innovation. And so it's not surprising after 9 years of these Liberal taxes and out-of-control spending that it's stifling entrepreneurialism. We saw that Canada lost 100,000 entrepreneurs. In the year 2000, Canada had 3 entrepreneurs for every 1,000 people. Today, that's down to 1.3 on average per 1,000 people. So this Prime Minister's bloated the size of the federal government at the expense of entrepreneurs and innovation. Mr. Speaker, what's sad is that this is happening here in Canada, and yet we've got every reason to succeed, but this government and these policies and this budget are dragging us down. And I contrast that to 2014, when there was the headline in the New York Times that declared Canada had the strongest, most prosperous middle class in the world. In fact, the New York Times suggested that the Canadian dream had replaced the American dream in many aspects in 2014. And that is why my Omas and Opas came to Canada following the Second World War from the Netherlands. And after the Hunger Winter, where the Dutch people were literally being starved to death by the Nazis, it was the Canadian troops that liberated them. And so many Dutch people came to Canada seeking that hope, opportunity, and freedom in Canada. And that is the story of so many Canadians over the course of our history. Yet, these people came with nothing in their pockets, as my grandparents did, and they could work hard, they could save up, they could buy a home, start a family. But after 9 years of this Prime Minister, that's no longer possible. Mortgages have doubled. They're not what they were in 2014 when the New York Times had that headline. Down payments have doubled. Rents have doubled. And taxes are up. And that's why Canadians of all generations and all backgrounds are upset. They're very upset, and it's the most common thing I hear. How is it that the Canadian dream has faded away? That the freedom to work hard and succeed, to have that opportunity, to have that hope, has drifted away after 9 years of this Prime Minister. And it used to be that 9 in 10 young people had given up on the dream of home ownership. It's now actually 9 in 10 Canadians overall that see no future, that see no hope. And so that is an indicator that here we have what the government calls farcically a budget that has fairness for every generation. It's actually unfairness for every generation, and they've eroded that hope. So that is why, Mr. Speaker, I will be voting against C-69, the Budget Implementation Act, because it does not serve the interests of any generation of Canadians. And it's long time past due that the Liberals get out of the way so that common sense Conservatives can unleash Canada's potential and bring home powerful paychecks. So let's bring it home. Thank you.